Welcome to an Uncredible show. If you want reliable and qualified political discussion delivered by a reliable and qualified source, seek elsewhere. Nevertheless, I will continue. So, I know some of you ghosts out there aren't thinking, Jay, what's up, dog? Why do you criticize Obama and the Republicans? And the Democrats? Now, you ethereals asking this question are watching too much mainstream media. Now, let me explain in an incredibly condescending and pedantic way. When I was in college, I took this course called Media in Politics. And some of our assigned reading came from a guy named Lance Bennett. I think is actually W. Lance Bennett or something like that. Like, somebody who tried to disguise their gender, except they fucked up because their middle name is actually a man's name. But he was brilliant. It was a great book. I actually read, and this will betray how much of a dork I am. I actually read the entire thing, even though we're only assigned some small excerpts from it. If you're listening to this, maybe you've done something like that yourself. I don't think I'm getting a lot of... if you're a ghost and you have nothing else to do, obviously, there's books sitting right over there, so you've probably gone through and read those. What else you gonna do? So one of the things he talked about, I'll go through these as quickly as I can, and at the end I'll explain why the fuck you should give a shit. He talks about these 4 different kinds of, he calls them information biases, and they're different things, I don't remember how he defines them, but I've always thought of them as shortcomings in the media that sort of make us focus on things that we'd be better off not focusing on, and they sort of conceal what's really important, and it's almost done in this like purposeful way that deceives us. But I'll get into it. You'll see what I'm talking about once I actually get into this. So, this is all to explain why I criticize Obama, the Republicans, and the Democrats. Because I know a lot of people like to try to. If one of you non-existent people out there were going to ask me, what I don't understand what the fuck you're talking about. Most of the time you're talking, what party do you belong to? What's your ideology, or any of these kinds of questions? I think those are false questions. How's that for condescending? No, they're good questions, but it's not easy to answer without giving some kind of explanation. Like I could say I'm an independent, and what the fuck does that mean? Nobody knows. It can mean anything. So I'm going to give you that explanation in case somehow I become a success later, and I'm still doing these kinds of shows, and if somebody wants to go back to the early times just to see how incredibly shitty this stuff was, at least there'll be something of substance here, some kind of foundation for being able to, put me in whatever category you seem is appropriate. So let me go through these things, and I'll explain. The first information bias is called personalization, which Bennett defines. I'll just read how he defines it. He says it's the media's tendency to, quote, downplay the big social, economic, and political picture in favor of human trials, tragedies, and triumphs. Now, this one is self-evident. If you've watched any local news or paid attention at all to any news, whether it's local or national, it's self-evident. But just as one example in terms of national politics, a recent example would be the same old song we hear every 4 years with the presidential elections. Truth be told, these days we're actually in a constant campaign, right? So I think it was the day after Obama got reelected, they were already talking about who was going to run in 2016. They're talking about Chris Christie. They were talking about not Ron Paul, whatever the fuck his name is, Rand Paul, the libertarian. I think people are already referring to Hillary Clinton as the front runner, and at this point, it's been over 6 months since the election. But I mean, this was the day after, so that's a clear example of personalization. Downplaying the social, economic, and political picture in favor of, in this case, it would be. Well, I don't know if you could refer to the election as a tragedy or a triumph, but it was definitely not a big social, economic, or political picture. It was just about some candidates. Anyway, yeah, we're in constant campaign mode, but the campaign itself is a perfect example of focusing on people instead of issues. And that seems a little bit counterintuitive because they pretend like they care about issues, but the vast majority of the issues that exist, the two candidates actually agree on. When it comes to foreign policy, they're almost exactly the same. You know, they had some superficial differences between, when it came to the economy. And as it turns out, Obama sort of went back on everything that... I'm generalizing way too much. Skip ahead. Forget what I was going to say. The two parties are the same. I digress. Okay, so just look at how the media talks about, just generally speaking, who said what, when did they say it, what gaffes did they make while they were campaigning, who's leading in the polls, whether they seem to be tired. Remember Obama, they talked about, he seemed tired and that's why he lost the first debate. Are they frustrated or whatever, who gives a fuck? Stupid stuff. But rather than looking at the evidence of, for example, just pulling one out of my ass, they could have looked at what the Bush tax cuts did to the economy and, how the repercussions of that fanned out through and permeated through every aspect of the country, essentially. That would have been an issue that they could have focused on, but instead it was all that other bullshit. Gaffes, polls, who's feeling tired, etc. Okay, that's personalization. I went on way too long. It was supposed to be a lot more condensed than that. So let's go to the second one. Dramatization. I would say the most relevant example of this bias recently can be observed in the way the media talks about Muslims. Particularly particularly when it comes to terrorism. They're all evil, we're all good, we're always right, they're always terrorists, especially when it comes to, violence. Like, how do you really differentiate between what's terrorism and what's not? I mean, this is really controversial. People who say we're justified in the droning that we do overseas, and the collateral damage is, the collateral consequences are what they call it. But really, what they're talking about is killing innocent civilians. They say, that's not the same as purposely killing innocent civilians because we don't purposely target them. But Glenn Greenwald described his view on whether drone attacks could be considered purposeful killing in an interesting way, where, if you do it for long enough, and each time you do it, civilians die, in large numbers, in total and proportionally to the actual terror suspects we can verify we've killed, it approaches something like purposeful. Now, I'm paraphrasing. He said something like that. It wasn't exactly like that. If you know him, he's a lot more articulate than I am. He can also pronounce the word articulate the first time. But, so, again, I digress. Dramatization. So, the way we focus on... Okay, I showed you a chart. It was either yesterday or the day before. I think I showed it twice, actually. That shows how few of the terrorism deaths that have occurred, it was either around the world or in this country. I think it was in this country. how few of the terrorism deaths were committed by Muslims, as compared to the total number of terrorist attacks. And it was an incredibly small number. I think it was 6% in the last 20 years of terrorism attacks were Muslim. And then there are other kinds. There were obviously right-wing terrorist attacks, left-wing terrorist attacks, which are usually the eco-terrorists types, and there were some other ethnic groups. But, let alone other things that kill us, like smoking, car accidents, disease, famine, these types of things. But based on the way the media sensationalizes these, Muslim terrorist attacks, we would think it was the leading cause of death in the entire world. That's dramatization. Instead of focusing on the bigger, the reality of, what's actually going on. Okay, I know some people will say, okay, maybe, Muslim terrorism only accounts for 6% of all the terrorism done, but, and I will acknowledge that this is true. In terms of total deaths in the last 20 years, Muslims are at the top of the list, and that's because of the biggest terrorist attack, which of course was 9/11. So, granted that. I'm talking about the total number of actual attacks, okay? Another objection some people might raise is, look at Iran. They'll say, Jay, which, that's my name. I don't know if I've ever said that before. Maybe they haven't killed that many people yet. Maybe if they get a nuclear bomb, then Jesus is going to come back inhaling brimstone and scorching fire, because that's what the Bible says. I know, terrorism sucks. I agree. But did you ghosts know that the White House, the Pentagon, U.S. intelligence, and even Israeli intelligence, and some members of the Israeli military, as well as International Atomic Energy Agency, which is IAEA, all have concluded that Iran doesn't have anything close to nuclear weapons? It's shocking. I know, you wouldn't believe that. Reuters, I'll even quote from Reuters in order to, provide a little bit of evidence here. They said, quote, the United States, European allies, and even Israel generally agree on three things about Iran's nuclear program. Tehran does not have a bomb, has not decided to build a bomb, and is probably years away from having a deliverable nuclear warhead. I know what you're thinking. We're ghosts. We don't give a shit about nuclear weapons. We're dead, for Christ's sake. But we're a compassionate apparition. So what if Iran gets a nuclear weapon in the future? Well, that's not the fucking point, is it? If the president debates, in the presidential debates, excuse me, do you guys recall the, I don't remember which debate it was. It might have been the first one. The one with, what's his name, Jim Lehrer? I think that was the first one. No, it was the second one. No, because it was a lady that asked the question. Anyway, that's not the point. She asked the question, but it was premised with something like, we all know Iran is the gravest threat U.S. faces. What's your favorite color? I forget what the actual question was, but the premise was that Iran is the greatest threat the U.S. faces. Bullshit! You get the point. That's dramatization. I just quoted that thing. They don't have a bomb. Somehow we all think they have a bomb. It's the fucking media. But in fairness, Reuters is part of the media, so I don't know, maybe it's just the cable networks, or the cable news, maybe it's the broadcast news. Who the fuck knows? But it's this Reuters thing, it got buried under all of the other bullshit about Iran. The march to war that's been going on for years. And there's a reason for that. Terrorism is a sexier thing for ratings, and it's in the interests of the parent companies who own the media companies because of the military-industrial complex, obviously, which makes sense. There's a huge benefit to dramatizing the news. So dramatization. I went on way longer than I expected to on those two. Here's the third one, fragmentation. If you're still listening, oh, thank God. You're so sweet. Fragmentation is a tendency to focus and frame stories on an individual basis while ignoring the interconnectivity of issues, right? So I think the best example of this is the way the Muslims are constantly portrayed, and this is somewhat similar to the last one I did, constantly portrayed as this existential threat, like, say, after the Boston bombings, for example, while simultaneously ignoring the bigger social, economic, and geopolitical consequences of our policies in the Middle East. We focus on these individual bombers and this particular bombing that they did. And I'm going to go to Glenn Greenwald again. This idea was characterized in something he said. He said it was the cliche question, why do they hate us? And to which Joe Scarborough of MSNBC poignantly once answered, they hate us because they hate us. Brilliant analysis, I know. Instead, what they should have done in that case is, maybe give a tiny bit of thought into what might have motivated them. I mean, is that relevant at all? I mean, if you're trying to figure out, if you capture somebody and you're trying to figure out, did they have accomplices, just from a local or a logical standpoint, somebody keeps doing a certain kind of crime. Isn't it in everybody's best interest to figure out why the fuck they're doing it to us? I mean, isn't they hate us because they hate us? I mean, what it reminds me of is the way, Christian Scientists, right? So people who think that when their children get sick, they should, if you just pray, they'll get better. If they're having an allergic reaction, for God's sake, don't give them Benadryl. Just pray, and they're going to get better. They blew up this bomb. For God's sake, don't try to figure out why. They hate us because they hate us. That's it. That's fragmentation. Rejecting the larger issue, focusing on the smaller one. And you know what? I'll be honest. I may actually be wrong about what he meant by fragmentation. I never had a perfect grasp on that, so you may just want to disregard that whole part of the show. On that note, I'll move on to the last one, which is called authority disorder bias. Bennett calls this one the most obvious one. I would go a step further and call it the most dangerous one, and I'll explain why. In order to do so, I'll go back to what I was talking about at the beginning, which is to answer the question you Ghosts asked, didn't ask, obviously, which is, why do I criticize Obama and the Republicans and the Democrats and the media? There's nobody left. No, that's not true. I don't criticize Peter Krause. I think he's a fine actor. I think his best work was on Sports Night, but you can't have everything you want. 6 Feet Under was pretty good. Parenthood is somewhat less good, but it's still all right. Aren't you just a malcontent? That's the Ghosts not asking me another question. The answer is yes, I might very well be a malcontent, but that's a non sequitur. That has nothing to do with why I criticize Obama and the Republican Dems, so shut the fuck up. That was a grammatical joke. I apologize for that. Now you can see why I was, somewhat dubious about whether I was actually going to get laid last night. It hurts not to be cool. Authority disorder bias means that when things go wrong, you blame the authority, right? So I should say, sort of as a semi-disclaimer, politicians are guilty of all kinds of stuff. But the bigger problem, in fact, maybe the biggest problem, is, say it with me, the system, right? So, keeping to format, I'll give an example of authority disorder bias to illustrate, right? So, in fact, I'll give you maybe a couple, maybe a few examples. We'll start with one. When unemployment is up, what do the talking heads always come out and say, especially during the election cycle, right? It's the president's fault. In fact, whoever is the incumbent is inevitably going to get this question um, unless unemployment is just, really, really low, which, at least in recent history, hasn't happened that much. They know they're going to get this question. In fact, the Republicans this election cycle, they had a mantra. It was jobs, jobs, jobs. Actually, that might have been in 2010 when they ran for the midterm elections, and then they didn't introduce any job bills. Whatever. Okay, so this is as far as I can see from my sort of armchair observation deck. It's the most frequently used criticism in politics, at least when it comes to the incumbent during an election cycle. But look how devoid it is of any content, right? You just blame the dude in a soundbite, and you ignore the things that are causing the job losses, which is a hugely complex issue. What is the point of just saying it's the leader's fault? Again, we better start to figure out what's actually going on here, right? Here's another problem. People have really short attention spans, right? Which is actually, it's reflected in the amount of time they should actually get on news. They know that nobody's gonna, if you go on for longer than 30 seconds, in a segment, which sort of makes me reconsider why the fuck I'm doing this. The people are going to tune out and they're not going to watch. Now, I actually don't think that's true. I think it's true of the kind of vapid programming they do on, the mainstream news. But it's a complicated issue. Even if you took the whole hour or even the whole 24 hours, you probably couldn't explain this complex issue. It's much easier just to blame the dude in charge. And that's an example of authority disorder. Another example, and by the way, this one will show sort of the interconnectivity of these biases, and you can kind of see that all throughout. These different biases are more nuanced and similar than they are different. They're all interworking. And the example I'm thinking of is the war in Iraq. Yes, of course, the officials have massive blame, right? And the people who ordered the torture and the shock and awe campaign, which you could argue is terrorism by definition, and lying to get us into the war, and to get us to agree to the war, share a huge amount of blame. Yeah, I agree. But if you step back and take a look, even if you don't know the answers, you can ask questions, right? Like, why did they want to go to war? Why did they have to lie about it? Who gained what from it? How did they get away with it? Why did the media support them 99% of the time leading up to it without asking the serious questions that we needed? Well, ghosts, if you've been following along, it's because these information biases are entrenched in the media, right? They're running through and through, and it's a self-perpetuating machine. So, why do I criticize Obama? Well, the short answer is because he's patently deceitful, or at the very least, when he got into office, he seriously he got ganked, or is that the right terminology? He got jacked up, I think is the term I was looking for, by the corrupt system, and he flipped on all of his progressive stances that he ran on during the campaign, right? And those are facts. I mean, I know that he talks a good progressive game, and he's like, and actually, even though he talks a good progressive game, if you listen closely, you can tell. When he's campaigning, he outright just went back on all that stuff. But while he's in office and he's giving speeches like the one he gave either yesterday or the day before about the continuing war on terror, that, because he's been having all this pressure about all this stuff. In that speech, you can pick it apart, and a lot of people have. I know Michael Hastings did it, Glenn Greenwald did it, Cenk Uygur did it on the Young Turks, and you can see what he's actually getting at. You can see how he's planning on continuing the war. I'm not going to do that myself. You guys can check that out for yourselves with those different analyses that I mentioned before. But the longer answer for why I criticize Obama, which is a lot more philosophical, is that when you have a system that doesn't work, it doesn't matter who gets into office. Because even if they are somehow able to defy all the seductions and opposing influences that are intrinsic to the job, they're just one person, and one day there's going to be another son of a bitch who is not so, I wouldn't use this word for Obama, but for the sake of this argument, benevolent, and then they will abuse the system. I mentioned Cenk Uygur Cenk Uygur a few seconds ago, and I was watching the Young Turks the other day, and a viewer asked him. He's the host of the Young Turks. In a segment that they do, he said, if you could interview President Obama, what would be the first question you'd ask him? And Cenk said, I would ask him, what did you mean by change? That's a good fucking question. If you recall, Obama ran on change. I mean, how could you forget that? The slogan, change, hope. But specifically, I mean, he was talking about the bigger change, right? And this is something else Cenk pointed out. He pointed out an ad that the president ran, which said something like, I don't want to do the same old politics a little better. I want to change the system. And I believe that sentiment, more than anything else, is why Obama got elected the first time. And I guess sort of why he got elected the second time, although the second time might have had more to do with the fact that Romney was obviously a complete piece of shit, but he ran on change. That was not peripheral to his campaign. It was his campaign. And, for whatever reason, whether he was lying or whether he changed his mind, he didn't change the system. I don't know if you know that. I don't know if you realize that. I'll just give you one example, and this is another one from Cenk. He's brilliant, this guy, Cenk Uygur. He pointed out in a different video. This is in a different video from the one where the show I was watching, and this is the example of how Obama abandoned his just one example of how he abandoned his promises. And by the way, I'm going to include a link to a site that lists all of the quote broken promises from Obama's the candidate Obama versus President Obama. And you can find this story among a whole bunch of other ones in there. There are links to different articles, not just like a list of things. There's this guy named Billy Towson who was a congressman in some capacity. I don't remember where. He did a deal during the Bush administration that amounted to, among other things, that the government couldn't negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical companies, right? Which is insane, obviously. Now, not only did Obama run on changing the system in general, but he ran specifically on Billy Towson, against the idea of Billy Towson, I guess I should say, as an example of the system that needed changing. In fact, that might be where that quote I mentioned before came from, the one about I want to do the same politics a little better, I want to change the system. It might be from that ad. After Towson got that bill passed, he went to work for pharmaceutical companies as a lobbyist, making about $2 million a year. Now, you know how this ends already, right? I don't need to tell the rest of this story. Besides, I mean, maybe you're ghosts with telepathic powers. Do ghosts have telepathic powers? I don't know. I don't know about the occult. Are ghosts part of the occult, or is that like zombies? The only thing I know about the occult is what I saw in Thriller. Um, so Obama gets into office and he cuts the same deal with pharma, dealing with Billy Dawson, the same exact deal. In fact, he made it worse in a couple ways. One, by banning the importation of drugs. So you're not allowed to go to Canada, where they have really cheap pharmaceuticals, and bring those in. You have to buy the jacked up priced pharmaceuticals here, at jacked up because the pharmaceutical companies aren't allowed to, or the government isn't allowed to negotiate with them. And he fixed it so the patents on the drugs were extended from 5 years to 12 years. So nobody can make generic drugs in the United States until 12 years. So, a fucking monopoly. That's why I criticize him. He's a product of the system, the one that the media perpetuates with their biases, the information biases I talked about, in the way they cover the news, because they're part of the system. They're supposed to be adversarial to the system, but anyone who has seen the White House Correspondents' red carpet knows how much of a fucking joke that is, which is something else Cenk pointed out. I'm stealing all my stuff from the Young Turks and Cenk Uygur tonight. And if you're looking carefully, a lot of the stories I get come from watching that show too. Although I do try to, put my own analysis in there. And by the way, his coverage of the White House Correspondents' Dinner is way better than the tiny little bit that I did on it here. Show's called The Young Turks. Watch it. In fact, I'll end by quoting Cenk. And this goes to the heart of what I've been talking about. Why do I criticize both parties and Obama? Well, it's easy. Cenk said, it's not the Democrats versus the Republicans. It's the Democrats and Republicans versus us. And when the media uses those different four information biases to blind us to what's really going on, behind the scenes, the political system that is so corrupted. They flash things in front of our eyes we're supposed to pay attention to. Celebrities, check this out. Muslims, you got to be scared of them. Sensational reporting. There's a terrorist bomb that went off. Oh, they're Muslims. They're Muslim terrorists. Forget about all the drones we do in the Middle East that cause them to hate us. They hate us because they hate us. That's all you need to know, right? It's them versus us. That's the point. That's why I criticize them. It's obvious. And if you're registered to a party and you feel a sense of loyalty to either one of them, I encourage you to take a hard look at that red or blue cap and think about it. And stop haunting me. It's not nice. I have bad dreams. I've gone on way too long. Take it easy. Bye.